I remember in Thailand once, some bloke from the UK came up to me and goes, "Hey, it's John McEnroe," and I'm like, "You cannot be serious." but
wow. Okay.
I took it. But back in 1989, you won a US Open with the great Johnny Mac. What was that experience like, playing with one of the greatest of all time? The one and only Mark Woody Woodforde. Welcome to Sports Legends with Bevo.
Bevo, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
You made the move over there many years ago. How's it going over there?
It's home away from home. I miss being in Adelaide, but look, I haven't lived in Adelaide since I was 17. I mean, that was the first year that I travelled overseas, and when I started to have a bit of success, I realised that in order for me to function, week in, week out and be at the top of my game, instead of travelling back to Australia on my weeks off, it was probably out of necessity for me to be having a base, at least here in the US, and a base in Europe. So probably in the late 80s, I first started looking around at a condo here in the California desert. So I'm not too far away from Indian Wells, which is one of the great tournaments, probably the best tournament outside of the 4 Grand Slams. And this is where I met my wife and raised our kids. So, the desert is home for me at the moment.
And let's go back to your tennis journey back in good old South Australia, Mark. Tell us about where it all began for you.
That's a long time ago.
Where it all began, and explain how you made your way through the ranks to go on and be one of the best doubles players of all time with, of course, the one and only Todd Woodbridge and John McEnroe before that, which we'll get to a little bit later on.
Growing up in Adelaide, I think it's always helpful, probably, looking at that time frame. It's always helpful in your age group when you've got mates, when you're not the only one. Growing up in Adelaide, there was 3 or 4 others that were actually I was good mates with, and we were around that same level, and so you had this friendly rivalry, and so getting into the state squads was it helped me. The weeks that I'd come up to, or the days that I'd come up to Memorial Drive after school, and I'd be getting great practice against the likes of Darren Cahill, who we know is one of the all-time coaches at the moment. Peter Carter, who also worked with Roger Federer before his untimely passing a number of years ago. Todd Viney. There was probably at least half a dozen guys that I could get good practice with. Probably where the roads started to just separate was when the Australian Institute of Sport was formed, and I applied along with some of my good mates there in Adelaide to move to Canberra and become part of the system, the player development program. And unfortunately for me, I was never selected, and at that time, in that time frame, I was probably, I was a little better than the rest of the guys. I had, was winning tournaments, and just probably a slight edge above those guys. But I wasn't selected to go into the Institute of Sport. And whilst I was extremely frustrated. I was upset. I was no doubt, I was 15, 16 years of age, and no doubt we had a little bit of anger. I was like, what have I done? What is it that, they're not picking me and they're picking the others? But look, I probably put it into the right context at that time. I didn't let it change me or alter my course. My goal was still to become a professional tennis player. There's no one route that you take to become a professional tennis player. So, look, I figured it was a minor setback, but it wasn't going to cause me to, it might delay my journey, but it wasn't going to deviate my journey. So there were other avenues for me, and I ended up traveling away with an independent coach a former professional player, which we don't have that many from in Adelaide. We've probably had more over the last 20, 30 years, but before then there were few and far between. But this one guy, Barry Phillips-Moore, who was a good friend of my dad's, and he at the time was taking young fellas away over to Europe to learn how to play tennis and only play in Europe, only play on the clay courts, It's a surface that we don't have in Australia at all. And so instead of moving to Canberra, I felt like that I did my apprenticeship or my kind of my uni course over in Europe, traveling around with, again, in a team scenario, with other guys around Australia who were in the same boat as I was. They weren't good enough to be in the player development program, and they had to go about learning tennis on their own privately, being funded by their parents. And I was really fortunate that my parents were able to fund me. I mean, we weren't wealthy by any means. I have two older sisters, and my parents were still helping them out as well. But I think being the only son, and my dad really wanted to give me that opportunity of trying to become a tennis player. So, I look back now and I think, it was one of those moments. It's like, thank goodness I didn't get selected in the Institute of Sport, because I don't think I would have achieved what I did in the game without going through those experiences that I did traveling in a team over in Europe the first 4 years.
And how much of an influence has Ray, your dad, been on your career as well, Mark?
Dad, oh my goodness. Well, look, we've had our moments, and I think I tried to stop being coached by my father when I was 15, 16. I think for anyone that knows my dad, Ray, and we give him a nickname now called Razor Ray. He's very sharp. He has a loud voice. He's not shy about telling you whether you're doing things wrong or whether you're doing things right. It actually was a difficult thing as a 15 or 16-year-old to think that you could do some things right. Look, throughout my career, he's been a constant presence. My parents, I went through in my early 20s. My parents are separated, they divorced. I didn't spend a lot of time with my dad through a period of time, but I realized that he's my dad. And he was the one that probably instilled a lot of the necessary components for me to be a professional athlete. And, look, I look back and I still have to laugh at times when he did come away. And look, he never played at this level, at a professional level, but boy, he still thought he could coach me all the way. And the times that, he might be sitting next to my coach and I'd be looking over at my coach on the change of ends to try and draw upon that energy. And my dad would stick his head in front of my coach, thinking that I'm looking at him, and he'd give me the fist. Come on, young fella. And I'd have to walk down and say, I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at my coach. Would you still sit back? I think even to this day, when we talk about when I catch up with him and say that I've been out having a hit, and it's always that. So how'd you hit him? What racket did you use? Did you hit him okay? And did you beat the other person? I'm like, Dad, calm down. I'm just having a social hit. So he a tremendous influence. I think as any father, that when their kid is out there playing a sport that they loved and they never had that opportunity, he kindly and lovingly provided that opportunity for me to realize my dream.
And speaking of realising dreams, a man by the name of John McEnroe, who many a time, Mark, I've been told I look like, unbelievable. I remember in Thailand once, some bloke from the UK came up to me and goes, "Hey, it's John McEnroe," and I'm like, "You cannot be serious." But
wow. Okay.
I took it. But back in 1989, you won a US Open with the great Johnny Mac. What was that experience like, playing with one of the greatest of all time?
Look, Ed, I've had a few moments in my career. I think that, right place, right time. I before I got to partner him in doubles, I actually had to play against him in singles. And I don't know about you, mate, but whenever he played, as I say, I was a real Bjorn Borg fan. So whenever he played Bjorn, I was always, I wanted to be like the Swede. I wanted to be ice cool on the court. I wanted to be so focused and never wanted to miss a ball. And I never, ever cheered for McEnroe. I mean, I kind of hated the guy. I just was like, what? That guy's crazy. He's nuts on the court. And, it was all about the way he held himself on the court. I just never, ever embraced that at all. And so when I got to play him in singles, look at you in singles, it's mano a mano. You're not, you're against that one guy up the other end. And of course, at times, you have to dislike the guy up the other end. So, I think in singles, it was far easier for me to actually not like him. And I had to play him in a span. I played him twice in a span of 2 weeks. One was in the Canadian Open, and I ended up winning in the quarterfinals. I beat him, and that was a huge moment for me in my career, because at that stage, my career was really starting to take off in singles. And so I had this experience of beating him in the singles, and I know that we're short, limited time, I should say, and I've got some great stories about him after actually beating him, and he was in the locker room, and I didn't know that he was there, and I excitedly called home and said that I'd beaten John McEnroe, and I had no idea he was in the locker room listening to these phone calls, and then when he walked out, I kind of panicked because I was thinking, oh my God, because I remember saying to my mum and my dad on the phone saying, yeah, the guy was a real asshole on the court.
Oh no!
And so, so he came out from the area in the locker rooms and came up to me, and I for sure thought he's going to clobber me. But he actually looked at me and he shook my hand and he said, you really impressed me. And he said, you look like my idol, Rod Laver. He said, you're a lefty. You've got the same colouring. You hit the ball like he did tonight. He said, too good. And he said, I wish you all the best for the next match. So when he walked out, I quickly got on the phone again and I called my parents and my sisters. And I was like, he's not an asshole. He's a really nice guy.
That's amazing.
So that was how I kind of my first interaction with McEnroe, and then the US Open came around 2 weeks later, and I drew him. We were in the part of the draw where if we both won a couple of matches, we'd have to play again, and which that's how it eventuated, and I won again. I won in 5 sets on center court of the US Open, and that was his home Grand Slam. So. The antics of McEnroe, as well as a very partial crowd, and then 2 weeks later, the tour continued, and there was a tournament in Los Angeles that I was playing in, and he was playing in, and I went in to sign up for a partner. My regular partner at that time was Wally Masur from Australia. Wally wasn't at the tournament, so I just went in to sign up for who was looking. And at that time, the tour manager who had the list of you actually have to sign in for the doubles entry. I had to wait for him to finish this phone call, and he whispered to me that he was talking to John McEnroe. And so I whispered back to him saying, oh, tell McEnroe I'm available to play doubles. And so that's what he did. He said, oh, but Junior, by the way, that young Australian kid that beat you the last couple of matches, the last 2 events, I know he's just put his name down for a doubles partner. Would you consider him? And the phone call finished very quickly, but about an hour later, McEnroe got back in touch and said that he would play doubles with me, and it was kind of one of those moments though that you kind of like semi-serious, but you're not really serious, because I didn't think it was going to happen. I mean, I just didn't think he'd say yes, and then I was petrified when I got word that we were going to play doubles, and because all of a sudden, as I mentioned earlier, I could not like him very easily when he's my opponent, but all of a sudden playing doubles, you have to love your doubles partner, right?
Yeah.
You've got to really trust them and get to know them, and so all of a sudden, I kind of had to, I guess, not dislike him. And that was really probably the most difficult part of playing with him in the early first few matches was, trying to get to know him. And but look, I had a great time with him. Once I relaxed and could kind of get a few words out of my mouth, because I was sitting next to arguably the greatest doubles player. And I just had to pinch myself at times. Even though I'd beaten him in singles, it's just so different when they're sitting beside you on the change of ends. And so, look, I can firmly say, I believe to this day that I would not have achieved the results on the doubles court if I had not had that opportunity playing with John McEnroe. I learned a lot. I was in awe. It just was amazing to be with someone with greatness, to be partnering with greatness. And he opened my eyes up. I thought that I knew a little bit about doubles, that I could play a little bit, but I quickly learned that I didn't know much about doubles. But hey, I took that opportunity and sponged as much information from him as I could. And but yeah, he, thankfully I had that opportunity. And look, I've been blessed. I really have been blessed with partners. I played with John McEnroe. I got to play with Martina Navratilova in mixed doubles. And look, she's arguably the greatest ever female tennis player when you combine singles, doubles and mixed doubles together. I mean, I got to play with Martina as well. And I learned a tremendous amount. I won a Grand Slam with her at Wimbledon, which helped me succeed when I got to play with Todd in that fantastic partnership that lasted 10 years. So I don't think the Woodies may not have had that as much success if I had not have had the experience of playing with Navratilova or McEnroe.
You mentioned Todd Woodbridge, obviously one of the best doubles combinations of all time, yourself and Toddy. You've been to numerous Olympics, won so many Grand Slams, Davis Cup, the list goes on. Looking back on your career, is it surreal to think the amount of success that you both had together?
It is. It is those moments, and even as I'm talking to you, and I kind of look away from the screen, it really was the best time, playing with, someone that was your best mate, someone that was experiencing, a similar pathway as to, we both were competitive. We both believed we could, improve on a yearly basis. We both had very similar goals. We might have had some differences. Obviously, me being left-handed, Todd being a righty. I was a little older, 5 years older than Todd. But it was like this jigsaw. When we got together, it really was this jigsaw. And again, I have to probably thank McEnroe for that, because when he decided that he was not going to be playing doubles any longer, he sat me down and said, just communicated with me that this was his decision that he was making, but he encouraged me to actually play with an Australian, someone who was younger, someone who was right-handed, because McEnroe believed the best doubles teams in history were a righty and a lefty combination. He encouraged me to focus on representing my country in Davis Cup. So if you could pair up with someone of a similar level, you could be playing Davis Cup for, the next decade or more. And someone who had a passion to be a player. And McEnroe's version of a tennis player was someone who wanted to play singles and doubles, and at the Grand Slams, try to play mixed doubles. So, with all of these attributes that McEnroe was listing, I mean, I probably started off with maybe 6 names in the mix. And as he kept going down, like 2, 3, 4, 5 on the list of attributes, probably my internal list of players who I could pair up with started to get shorter and shorter. And basically, at the end of that meeting with McEnroe, the one name that stood out to me was Todd Woodbridge. And so it wasn't too much longer that I reached out to Todd. I knew of Todd. We had the same agent at the time. And look, at being one of the, I wasn't one of the older guys at that time, but you're always aware of the younger generation that are coming up behind you because you know that they want to kick your butt. So I really did know Todd, and his ability at coming out of juniors. And of course, I was aware that he was finishing up his doubles partnership with Jason Stoltenberg, who he had played all his junior career with. And Todd had a tennis coach. At the time, I didn't have a tennis coach. I'd been working with a fitness trainer on my fitness, and Todd, I'd been told, was actually looking for a fitness trainer. So it's amazing how these pieces came together. And so the Woodies were born. And it didn't take long for us to really recognize this. There was just that feeling on the court. It is. I mean, I've played with a few different doubles partners in my time. Of course, I played with one of the greatest in John McEnroe, but I fully was aware that there was something great about pairing up with Todd. And I think he recognized it earlier. We just had this ability to work with each other, cover for each other on the court. And we just had that drive to keep getting better and better. So, just an amazing partnership, that one that I'll cherish.
Well, Mark Woodforde, I could speak with you all day, mate. There's so much more stuff I'd love to speak with you about. So hopefully we can do this again, maybe next time you're in Adelaide. But thanks so much for joining us today and going, for a trip down memory lane of your amazing career on Sports Legends with Bevo.
Mate, it's a pleasure. And yeah, let's get together again. And next time I can do it in Adelaide. So I'll be there at the back end of this year. So it'll be better to do a face-to-face one.
Absolutely. So much to still ask you about. Looking forward to it, mate. Thanks so much again.